The fairy tale cracked before it even had time to breathe, and the woman everyone called perfectly composed was already watching the storm form behind the palace curtains. While the world was hypnotized by glossy magazine covers and dazzling smiles, Catherine, Princess of Wales, was quietly piecing together a reality so uncomfortable, so unsettling, that it would take years before the public even dared to admit it. And now, with revelations from Tom Bower shaking the narrative, one question refuses to stay buried. Did Catherine see the truth about Meghan Markle long before anyone else even suspected it? Because here's where it gets unsettling. Back in 2017 and 2018, the world wasn't just supportive, it was obsessed. Meghan was being painted as the revolution the monarchy desperately needed. Fresh, bold, modern. The cameras adored her. The headlines worshipped her. And standing right beside her was Prince Harry, smiling in a way people hadn't seen in years. It looked perfect. Too perfect. And that's exactly where the cracks began, just not where anyone was looking. Behind those palace doors, where no cameras could soften the edges, Catherine wasn't celebrating. She was observing, watching patterns, catching small moments that didn't quite fit the fairy tale. And here's the chilling part, those moments weren't loud. They were subtle, almost invisible. The kind of details most people ignore unless you already know what to look for. Because what Catherine reportedly sensed wasn't jealousy, not insecurity, not rivalry, it was something far colder, a disconnect, a refusal to bend to the centuries-old structure that every royal before had quietly accepted. And that's where things start to feel off. Because according to Bower's account, Meghan didn't just struggle with royal protocol, she rejected it completely. Think about that. This isn't someone confused by tradition. This is someone who within months allegedly treated the system itself as something beneath her. The hierarchy, optional. The rules, flexible. The expectations for other people, not her. And Catherine, who had spent nearly a decade learning every nuance, every silent rule, every unspoken expectation, recognized that immediately. And then came the moment that quietly exposed everything. The curtsy. It sounds small, almost trivial, but inside royal walls, it's not just a gesture, it's a signal. Respect, structure, order. And when Meghan reportedly resisted showing that respect to Catherine, it wasn't just awkward, it was revealing. Because suddenly, the question wasn't, does she understand the system? It became, does she believe she's above it? Now pause. Let that sink in. Because while the public was celebrating the Fab Four and imagining sisterhood and harmony, Catherine was confronting something much more complicated. A personality that didn't just challenge the institution, it seemed to expect the institution to reshape itself around her. And that's where the tension begins to feel inevitable, not accidental. Not misunderstood, inevitable. But here's where the story turns sharper, darker. Because according to those same reports, Meghan didn't just question Catherine's position, she allegedly dismissed her entirely, described her in ways that stripped away respect, saw her not as a future queen, but as someone unworthy of the status she held. And if that's true, then everything changes. Because this isn't about adjustment anymore, this is about perception, power, and something dangerously close to rivalry. And Catherine, she didn't explode. She didn't confront publicly. She did something far more unsettling. She stayed quiet and watched. Because when you understand a system from the inside, you don't react to noise, you track patterns. And the pattern she reportedly saw was impossible to ignore. Public charm paired with private tension. Smiles for the cameras, friction behind closed doors. A growing gap between image and reality. Even the smallest details started to feel like clues. The pressure, the comparisons, the sudden shift in how royal appearances were perceived. Catherine, known for restraint and consistency, suddenly found herself standing next to someone who turned every moment into a spotlight, every appearance into a statement. And whether intentional or not, it changed the rules of the game overnight. And then, the most explosive thought of all quietly surfaced among insiders. The idea that Meghan didn't just want to belong, she wanted more. That she saw herself as deserving of a position that was never hers to claim. That she wasn't trying to fit into the structure, but to outshine it. And suddenly, Catherine's early unease doesn't look like suspicion anymore. It looks like recognition. Because how do you build trust with someone who may secretly believe they should replace you? How do you form a bond when the foundation itself feels unstable? And most importantly, how do you protect your family when the threat doesn't come from outside, but from within the very system you're sworn to uphold? That's the question Catherine was facing, long before the world even realized there was a problem. And what she did next, quietly, carefully, almost invisibly, would shape everything that followed. And here's where everything stops feeling like speculation and starts feeling like a slow motion unraveling that Catherine may have anticipated long before the world was ready to admit it. Because what happened next didn't explode overnight, it leaked out in fragments and contradictions in carefully worded interviews that somehow said everything without saying enough. And at the center of that storm sat one moment that would change everything: the interview with Oprah Winfrey. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle sat down in 2021 and began to peel back the curtain, it didn't just shock the public, it confirmed something far more unsettling for those who had been watching closely from the beginning. Because suddenly, private tensions weren't private anymore. Allegations were no longer whispers, and the carefully guarded image of unity completely shattered. And for Catherine, Princess of Wales, this wasn't just uncomfortable, it was personal. The narrative that unfolded during that interview didn't just criticize the institution, it placed Catherine directly in the line of fire. The story about the bridesmaid dress disagreement flipped public perception in seconds. The suggestion that she had made Meghan cry when other reports claimed the opposite wasn't just a detail, it was a weapon. And then came the broader implications. The subtle but devastating suggestion that the royal environment carried undertones of exclusion, suspicion, even prejudice. The kind of accusations that don't just damage reputations, they stain them permanently. And here's where the tension becomes almost unbearable. Because if Catherine's early instincts were rooted in pattern recognition, then this moment wasn't a surprise. It was confirmation. Every hesitation, every guarded interaction, every silent boundary she had built suddenly made sense. Because what she may have recognized early on wasn't just difference, it was unpredictability. And unpredictability inside a structure built on tradition, that's not just disruptive, it's dangerous. Because after that interview, something shifted permanently. This wasn't a disagreement anymore. It wasn't tension between in-laws. It became a fracture that stretched across continents, across media platforms, across public opinion itself. And while the world debated who was right and who was wrong, Catherine did something that now feels almost strategic in hindsight. She withdrew. Not dramatically, not publicly, but deliberately. Because when trust breaks at that level, distance isn't emotional, it's protective. And then the pattern continued. The Netflix series, the memoir, the steady release of personal stories, each one adding another layer to a narrative that kept pulling private royal life into public consumption. And every time a new detail surfaced, it echoed the same underlying theme Catherine had reportedly sensed from the beginning. This wasn't about fitting into the system. It was about reshaping the story, even if that meant tearing parts of it down. But the most unsettling part isn't just what was said, it's how it was done. Because according to insiders and reports that kept surfacing, the pattern extended beyond public interviews. It appeared in smaller moments, quiet interactions, the way staff described their experiences, the way certain expressions slipped through in unguarded seconds, a duality that felt almost theatrical, warmth for the cameras, something colder behind them. Some former staffers went as far as describing an environment that felt emotionally unpredictable, where perception and reality didn't always align. And whether exaggerated or not, those descriptions started to mirror something Catherine may have already identified years earlier: the gap between presentation and behavior, the difference between what is shown and what is experienced. And then comes the contrast that makes everything even harder to ignore. Because while Meghan's public appearances often leaned into visibility, branding, and messaging, Catherine's approach remained almost stubbornly consistent, quiet, measured, focused on the role rather than the spotlight. Even in moments of personal difficulty, she chose restraint over exposure, privacy over performance. And whether intentional or instinctive, that difference became impossible to overlook. There's a moment often described by observers that captures this contrast perfectly, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. Catherine speaking softly to members of the public, admitting her own discomfort in large crowds, leaning in to listen rather than stepping forward to dominate the moment. It didn't trend globally. It didn't break headlines, but it revealed something deeper, an approach rooted in presence, not performance. Now place that beside the growing pattern of high-profile projects, monetized visibility, and carefully curated narratives coming from across the ocean. And suddenly, the difference doesn't feel subtle anymore. It feels fundamental. Two completely different interpretations of what it means to hold a public role. One built on service within a system, the other built on redefining the system itself. And this is where Catherine's early concerns start to look less like personal opinion and more like foresight. Because everything that followed, the interviews, the media deals, the public narratives, didn't come out of nowhere. They followed a pattern patterns she may have recognized when it was still small enough to ignore. But patterns don't disappear. They grow, they evolve, and eventually they reveal themselves to everyone. What makes this story linger, what keeps it unsettled, is that nothing about it feels fully resolved. The distance remains. The silence between both sides says more than any statement ever could. And while headlines continue to speculate about reconciliation, about healing, about possible reunions, one question refuses to fade. Can something that was never fully aligned in the first place ever truly come back together? Because Catherine didn't just witness what happened, she responded to it before it fully unfolded. And now, looking back, every quiet decision, every measured reaction, every step taken away from the noise feels less like coincidence and more like preparation. And maybe that's the most unsettling part of all, that the warning signs were always there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment when the world would finally catch up to what one person may have understood from the very beginning.